Right, we're live. It is 6 p.m. Eastern, Thursday, the 27th of August, 3 p.m. Pacific time, and we've got none other than Chief Cone at Pinecone Research, Chase Taylor, also head of research at Bulwark Capital Management. Chase, it's brilliant getting you on. How are you?
It's a pleasure, and I got to say the pine cones and the squirrel came back today because I got rid of the pine cones that were stored in my shed by the neighborhood squirrels, and then I went in there this morning and they had gotten back in. They chewed a new hole in the floor to start stowing away their pine cones. So
my cousins are enterprising buggers. What can I say? What can I say? Hey, listen, keeping it in the wild. We've got all these central bankers in Jackson Hole. Later on today, my time, my night, my time. Let's talk about what we can expect from Warsh tomorrow first, because we're getting a lot of conflicting signals from AI written op-eds. I know that's not the point. I don't believe that Bessent, Warsh, and Bessent and the Druck are actually publicly fighting. What's your take?
I think it was legit from Druck, but I'm not necessarily sure, like all three of them, to your point. But to me, if it is fake, then what in the world was the point of Warsh going out and saying the bond market's doing the tightening for us and it's going to tighten up financial conditions, if 3 weeks later Treasury is going to come out and just undo that? Like that's the part that's hard for me. The way I'm viewing this perfectly personally is, at this point, obviously the White House doesn't care about inflation. Like, I don't think I have to spend any time telling people that. I think Bessent made it pretty obvious he doesn't care about inflation if he's willing to, hold bond yields back some while we run it hot. So to me, the only game left in town to care about inflation is the Fed. So I do think there is pretty significant pressure on Warsh to show that he cares, or like all the bond bulls have been staring at the fact that we don't have inflation expectations coming unanchored and all that stuff, and really hammering that. My view on that is like, cool, but if nobody in DC cares about inflation, then the market's gonna have to. Like, I feel like it's like a circular thing where everyone's like, well, expectations are fine. Well, yeah, that's because people expect someone in DC to do something about it. So if everyone in town says we're not going to do anything about it, then the market would have to go, do something about it. So, you look at like 5-10 year swaps, and they are chill to those people's credit. Like, they're not bad. And maybe that's right, because most of this inflation is like a 1-2 year thing or whatever, but it's been a 2-year thing for 6 years. So I don't know yet. I don't know these days. So that's the big thing for me. I think if he does come out and fumble, and not just Jackson Hole, but like the next policy meeting, and doesn't really do anything, like no one cares about your committees you put together if you're not going to do anything about inflation. And it's one thing when one of those three actors cares. When none of them care, I think you get back to some, 70s vibes with the fact that no one's really going to do anything about it.
Well, and we've seen gold and Bitcoin and some of the classic villains, or maybe not villains the right word, but the classic players kind of react since that meeting and beyond, right? And so people are, in the stock market, and things were pretty bearish going into the Fed meeting, if we remember back, about a month ago, and it's been quite an August for the bulls.
Yeah, especially like you mentioned, the liquidity proxies, because obviously, stocks had that really nice rip off of like hyperscaler earnings or whatever, but they haven't done anything since. But since they haven't done anything, you have the liquidity proxies kind of ripping higher. But why wouldn't they? It was one thing whenever they were like, hey, we're going to do some buybacks. And it's like, okay, well, that's dumb. That's not enough money to throw at this thing. That's just going to get the bond bears kind of excited, because you just let them know that you don't like this. Like, you showed them that weakness. But whenever they came out with the little like, well, by the way, we can, use the balance sheet, we can use TGA. That was like, okay, well, hold on. Like, that's different, way different. And if they were willing to do that, that could get really, really inflationary really fast. So
that's 1920s vibe.
Yeah, right. Like, And like Paolo Macro, like, you know, made the point, like, oh, like this is like EM stuff where you start financing everything at the front end. To be fair to the Treasury right now, like the weighted average maturity still not bad at all. But if you're going to start using TGA to reduce it, and you need to have enough firepower to keep bond vigilantes at bay, like that, you could really reduce some average maturity and
or the Raptors, as you and Paolo like to call them.
Yes, and I stole that directly from Paolo because it's just such a perfect analogy of
I love that.
The Raptors,
Muldoon, clever girls.
Exactly. Yep. It's funny because I found this T-shirt company that has a shirt literally called "Clever Girl" with like a hidden raptor in the leaves. It's good stuff.
Perfect.
I told our mutual pal Jason, if we get to 6% on the 30, I'm getting that shirt.
So what do you think Warsh's options are tomorrow, right? Because I'm sure his draft speech 4 weeks ago is looking pretty different from the one he's got ready for tomorrow.
I don't have a good read on this. I don't have a firm opinion. Obviously he could do any of the three things, not just talk about the long term and just skip it. He could come out hawkish to like alleviate some of these fears and, in my opinion, help Bessent out, because I think maybe Bessent doesn't realize it, but that's what he needs is a hawkish Fed. And it's not like they have to go raise rates 3% or something. Like, just give the market a couple 25 bippers in the next year and you'll probably be okay. Like, there's not that big a deal. I don't know why everyone's so concerned about one or two little hikes. They just did 3 cuts, you know, when they shouldn't have, like, very recently. So I don't think it'd be that big a deal if he was hawkish and they do deliver on one or two hikes here. But I don't know. His last presser was so bad. I struggled to like get a feel for what he thinks he wants to do here. I think he wanted to come in and just buy his time until his little committees came back with, you know, his grand master plan to be dovish, you know, under some academic guise or whatever. But obviously when, you know, in the middle of El Nino and a war in the Persian Gulf and tariff inflation and, you know, AI inflation, like, he just doesn't have the luxury to wait until, you know, that stuff comes back, you know, with the answers. Like, he has to be the answer. And so far he has done a pretty good job of saying nothing other than the bond market's tightening for us, which obviously he got rugged on that by his pal in 3 weeks. So I don't know. So to me, he should just be hawkish.
I want to put a pin in that AI inflation deflation debate, but I want to talk about something nearer term first, and how long you think Warsh has got before, you know, the diesel weasel starts to play. And you put together a great piece the other day. Just, I mean, obviously diesel touches everything in the real economy, and you know, that's just, you know, that's just front month diesel futures there. Obviously that's very different to what farmers are paying, but that's quite a scary chart if you're Warsh right now.
Yeah, and I don't know why this doesn't get more play, honestly. Like, I see so many of the people at the Fed, you know, talking about inflation as if it's just like a little one-off, and the tariff one-off's over. We just got to get the little energy one-off. Like, oil's already down. And even if you look at a chart of like inflation swaps, like a 1-year swap, and you overlay it with oil and then diesel, like the swaps came down with oil and they ignored the fact that diesel did not really come down, which is so dumb because, like, you know, not like, to your point, a farmer doesn't fill up his John Deere with, you know, with oil. It's diesel. 18-wheelers use diesel, trains use diesel, ships use diesel, like, you name it, right? Like, so to that point, like, the inflation impulse is hitting, and you can see it in all the, like, and I had in that piece, but a lot of the data for shipping and just moving goods, which obviously ends up getting embedded into the price of goods.
Price of everything.
Right. And more to the point, it ends up in services because services use a bunch of goods. So if you have goods inflation for people that do services, guess what? They have to raise prices. So, and we saw that, it was 6 years ago that we did that, where you had this one-off that they just shrugged away. And next thing you knew, it was like deep in services pricing and everything. Obviously there was more, you know, to it that time than this time because of, you know, how tight labor got. But even to that point, the way we were treating, you know, labor from a, you know, net immigration standpoint, they've all like decided wage inflation is completely dead, not coming back. And maybe it is. Like, there is definitely pockets of weakness in labor, but whenever you have a lot less net immigration, I mean, a lot of those less skilled jobs are going to have to be competed away, and a lot of native born people aren't going to work for the same wages that those people did. So like you might get some, and so far they're highlighting that, like, oh, look at this blue collar wage inflation, this is great. And it's like, it is, but it's also inflationary, man. So like be ready for that angle. But yeah, to your point, diesel touches everything. It's an inflationary impulse that they're sleeping on because they're all be like, oh yeah, but core is going to be fine, this is just energy. And then food inflation, which is like the most politically toxic, probably, in my opinion, via the super El Nino that is currently appearing to be a 500-year event, maybe at least, could get very problematic. So I think all of DC, whether it's Treasury, Fed, White House, are all sleeping on what inflation could become. Not necessarily will become, but definitely could become. So again, to me, like, you're better off to start just being hawkish now.
And is that political? Midterms coming up, they just want to like keep it together here. And an Anthropic IPO, and what is the impetus like? Because it seems like to me, inflation is a big risk, and why even play with fire, right? Like, if the back end, like you said, like give them some hikes, or at least like put up, and you can get the back end under control fast. You don't need to do this buyback twist nonsense. And honestly, you have no control over the super El Nino, and inventories of energy is low. It's much more fragile than it was in the spring. So I don't know. Yeah, it seems like not necessarily that they like to think about convex things, but like, I don't know. What do you think? Like, what is the motivation to do this, or is it just short-term thinking?
I think he nailed it the last part. I do think it's mostly short-term thinking, but I think you're right. Like, it was such an unforced error to do the buyback thing to me. But I compared this to like the president getting too confident because Venezuela went well, so he messed up in Iran. I think it was similar. I think Bessent saw himself, moving the yen around and moving oil around, and just started feeling pretty special. Like, he could just do whatever he wanted to markets. But like the bond market's complete, and he should know this obviously, but like that's a completely different ball game. So whenever he went
almost
in there,
like his mentor might have taught him that confidence is the death of trading, right?
You would think, right? Considering the shops he worked in, if anyone should have known, just leave that one alone. Like, it should have been him. But you're riding high. Like, hey, if I can move the yen around, let's go. Well, good luck with the sovereign market. But so I think that was part of it. It's such an unforced error, because the way I view this is like, you have to sit back and think whenever you're about to do that. Like, forget like adding $2 billion to the buybacks. Am I willing to take the next 4 steps if my bluff gets called by the market? And it's just like Iran. Like, forget the first week of the war. Like, what are you willing to do if the first week of the war and the second week of the war don't go as planned? Like, where do you see yourself in 6 months if most of everything you're trying to do didn't go right? And he didn't think about that, because I guarantee if you ask Bessent, like, hey, what if the bond market just says no, and then you say, hey, we'll up it, and then they say, no, thank you again. Like, point being, like, if you went all the way back and we're like, hey, are you just willing to say you'll throw the TGA at getting yields down? I feel like he'd be like, yeah, let's not do that. Like, that it doesn't seem like, to Druck / Claude's point, like, there was no crisis. There's no volatility problem. There was no liquidity problem. There was no equity market problem. Like, there was no problem other than, I don't like that price. Granted, I guess he has asymmetric information that the rest of us plebes aren't privileged to have. But at the end of the day, yeah, it probably is mostly about the election. Although, if you're going to run a war in the Middle East, call affordability crisis a hoax and everything. Like, I don't know why getting bond yields down 15 bips is going to, like, save the poor souls in the Midwest, that are trying to run tight elections with, purple districts or whatever. But yeah, probably. But my thing is, like, I don't think after the election's over, they're like, whew, oh, all right, now that that's over, like, let's get back to, finding some cuts in the budget and cool this thing off. Like, I think they'll just keep trying to run everything hot and gaslight us about how there's no inflation.
Yeah, in terms of the budget, you know, there's so little room to maneuver without really, really big politically toxic changes. So, you know, ultimately, it's some flavor of run it hot, just to inflate our way out of it. If you were running that playbook, how would you do it?
Oh man, I love this question. So, first of all, I'm okay with the like, let's just burn this thing down by running it so hot that the debt to GDP comes way down. But like, and we kind of have been doing that since 2017-ish in a lot of ways, right? But what if, like, I'll put it to you this way, like, what have we got to show for how hot we've run it so far? And I would answer nothing. Like, not
well,
much.
You got half the S&P at trailing at more than 10 times sales.
You're right. You're right. That is exactly right. So, for me, it would be, I would spend an absurd amount of money on things like R&D, reforming education, like subsidizing the crap out of things like getting like, you know, engineers that can do real important work. Yeah, like onshoring some of the strategic stuff that we have to do, like, I don't know, build a missile. That seems like something that would be a good idea right now. Build a drone that doesn't cost $1 bajillion. Stuff like that. Like, but honestly, education and R&D are like the two things that stand out to me. Now, the reason that's not going to happen is because that's planting a tree that you will not enjoy the shade of. So, given election cycles and short-term thinking, which just gets shorter and shorter, it seems like, you know, every year. I know that's not where any of this is going to go, but that is what I would do if I was going to run it hot. And the biggest thing to me is like you have to find a way to get healthcare spending as a percentage of GDP down in a meaningful way. To that makes the whole economy more productive. That makes the federal outlays less crazy for Medicare, Medicaid, VA benefits, and everything like that. I know it's a tough nut to crack or whatever, but like if you want to run it hot, at least run something cool. And what needs to be run cool is going to be healthcare spending. And given the technology advances, like if you can't get healthcare spending down by reducing a bunch of overhead and middlemen that just leach out hundreds of billions of dollars and stuff, then you're just, I don't know, you shouldn't be a leader.
That sort of has to be a bit of low hanging fruit for AI, if there is anything. And
it's one of the reasons I like healthcare. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything
AI
with paperwork, right? Like anything that's like super manual, you know, banks, middle offices, mortgage filings, that kind of stuff. Like seems like absolute low hanging fruit.
If they were unleashed to do it by regulations, not being insane or whatever, I'm sure it would.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah. So I mean, I suspect if I say is AI capex, or is AI inflationary or deflationary? I think we'd probably all three of us agree that the capex phase of it is definitely inflationary, but it's gauging the effectiveness and the impact of the deflationary sort of windfall at the back end and how long we have to wait for that. Where are you on that?
So to that point, another thing I would absolutely do while running it hot would be to build a bunch of, you know, power plants that could create cheap energy, because that, if you think about the price of compute, the price of intelligence 10, 20 years from now, like I think that's going to be the biggest differentiator. Like I think all of the, you know, the processing itself will be close enough to the same price globally or whatever that the tie goes to the cheap energy. And that's one of the reasons China outcompetes the US in everything, you know, that they make, is that, well, they have cheap and abundant power, and to a point where we don't. Obviously other things like labor and everything, but so yeah, obviously we're very inflationary now, and it's blowing out the trade deficit, which is hilarious because we, you know, this administration loves AI and it hates the trade deficit, but the more we pump AI, the more we blow out the trade deficit. And you see like those import numbers for, you know, the AI stack of hardware. It's crazy. Like we're just look at, you know, Korea, Taiwan's GDP growth, and it's like, wow, like this amazing like numbers for the money they're making for exporting that stuff. So yeah, very inflationary in the front end. I do assume deflationary on the back end. better hope so.
Back to trade deficit. The only reason the deficit's not looking a lot worse is because you're exporting refined products, which is another sting in the tail down the line.
Well, the refiners are going to go to the White House here soon, so that may be more worth watching than Jackson Hole.
Oh, I missed that. What did I miss?
Oh yeah, it's something like the president was bringing in a bunch of like refinery bosses here soon. I can't remember what day it's going to be, but I feel like
what can they do? They're already running at max capacity, right? And they're going to start blowing up these things.
Yeah, that's a very, very real risk that not enough people are talking about. Jokes aside. And
Yeah.
you can see that in the data. Like if you don't do the maintenance and give these things downtime, bad things happen.
Yeah,
that leads to more downtime, which is why they do the maintenance to begin with. Yeah,
like fires.
Yeah, I'm from the Gulf Coast of Texas. That's where I grew up. So I have been outside playing as a kid and just heard kaboom and felt like a shockwave because one of them had an accident. Like it's very real. Like I've known people that have gotten hurt and stuff in those. So my dad used to work in refineries. So yeah, that stuff's scary. Don't get me wrong. If I ran a refinery, I would tell people to go to work too with those margins. But
yeah, I know. But I mean, it is pretty wild. So back to running things hot. Now, one sector which I have always sucked at, and I think even if I was given the data in advance, I'd make the wrong call. Is housing and home builders, and I've always found you to be very thoughtful on the topic, and this is just the XHB right now, and it really can't make its mind up right now. Now, in what world of running things hot can these guys rejoin the party? You wrote a piece about this the other day, and I was just sort of cueing you to riff on that a little bit.
I mean, to me, with rates where they're at, like they just don't have a prayer. I mean, I feel like they've been miracle workers in the last 3 years. Like unbelievable that they're still doing what they're doing, or that like the employment side of this is doing as well as it is. So yes, I've been thoughtful on it. I've wrote some great pieces about this stuff. I haven't really been that right about home builders because I've expected less employment out of that space, and I've expected those equities to get hit more than they have so far. But this is an area where if you are going to go do yield curve control and you get 10-year reals way down, then yeah, I'm sure you can get it going again. If you get that wage inflation running hot enough to where a mortgage at 5 and change, 6 and change, whatever, doesn't seem that bad, then I guess they can get going again here. But it seems problematic to me. And for one thing, I'll fill everyone in. Like I'm not a big believer in this. Like we have this dramatic housing shortage. We overbuilt for like a decade, then we underbuilt for a decade. When you look at how many homes are second, third homes or Airbnbs, and like, I don't think it's really a housing shortage. Do I think we have a cheap housing shortage? Absolutely. Like that, no pushback there. But a bunch of that's rates. A bunch of that is inflation and the goods they make it with. Like a lot of those things have petroleum in them, or like things that are just, very expensive to ship or to manufacture. So a lot of it's just very inside of the product itself. But one thing I actually really like, and I haven't written this piece or haven't published this piece yet, though, is manufactured housing. Like the more I look into that space, it has I think it has a really bright future as people trade down to get away from inflation. It is dramatically cheaper than on-site builds. And there was actually, this is kind of crazy, but there was a piece of good legislation passed here in 2026. It kind of like makes it to where they can get similar financing as an on-site built home. There used to be this dumb rule where like if the thing had a chassis, you couldn't get like legit financing, even though a lot of times like the chassis is just meaningless or whatever. Like they got rid of all this stuff and made the policy make more sense. It's way cheaper. And if you think about building it in a factory in pieces or whatever, you net out, all these risks of like, workers that you're piecing together. You can just have like an actual trained professional staff that's there every day instead of like trying to piece together a bunch of subcontractors day by day, hoping it doesn't rain and everything. So that's a space. It just comes with.
Are there any? So Chase, on this sort of trailer park sort of prefab housing thing, are there any stocks? Are there any pure plays on the sector that you've looked at yet?
There is, but I haven't done that portion of the deep dive. I think there's the hard part is there's only like one or two. But there are some people that own a bunch of the communities. That part's a great trade now. I'm not convinced it will stay a great trade. You have less than 10 of these new communities open up per year right now. So like they have an amazing game right now, like because there's no new supply. But my it's hard to be bullish on the producers without being bearish on the people that run the communities. So I think you're going to pivot from the communities being a good trade to the manufacturers of the homes being a good trade. The biggest one is actually Berkshire, but like obviously that's far from a pure play. But there's a couple other names that people can dig into that I think look interesting. Yeah, but I haven't done enough work to like really talk about it.
And would you think the building materials guys then first, if that's the case?
If they have a direct supplier contract that kind of thing, I think that could work out. But not if it's just a net out at the site. If you sell to site built homes and you sell to manufactured and you just lose one for the other, then it could net out kind of flat for those guys. But
yeah.
One interesting thing is like the price appreciation for manufactured homes is actually it's kept up for like the last decade with site built homes. So like it's not like you're buying a boat where 5 years later you're just getting destroyed on the principle of it. The more I've looked into it, the more surprised I've been with. It started out with like driving down the street and seeing like a abnormal amount of people living in RVs and people's front driveways, like probably grandparents type thing, or kids that live in their parents' driveways. And like we live in a pretty affluent community. And there's a lot, and that it hit home for me. Like, man, a lot of people are taking measures to get away, to deal with inflation that are kind of unseen. And that's when I started to look into like, all right, what other ways would people do this? They would downsize to save money. And then the more I've looked at it, the more promising it seems.
I mean, I had a look at the RV sector about a year and a half, 2 years ago, because I was viewing them as a sort of a high price consumer discretionary item. And actually you put that prism on
Exactly.
as alternative housing. I understand why I lost money on that trade now.
I could see it. I've struggled with this because I see both sides of it. It's like no one has enough money for an RV / everyone has enough money for an RV as a house. Like so it is a tough one.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
they're sweet now. Like the home like ones are like a home. They're nice.
Our friend of the show, Mike Green, and his wife traveled around in an RV for a couple of years. They left, and now he's got a home again. But like I was talking about that. So I mean, people do it, right? Like, the question ultimately is this also a function of rates, right? Mortgage rates are high,
For sure.
and I've kind of always been like I'm a bull on Rocket Mortgage of like, hey, if rates can come down. Mortgage spreads can come down, AI can help them. But, it's kind of all one of those things where you think about this whole market being great, but this consumer housing is flat. So very much a stock picker's market. And so, I guess that would be the next leg, right? Like if we have AI roll, then eventually credit spreads are going to go out because there's so much credit with it. And you would think front end will come down. Long end comes down, and then maybe that's would be the time that this stuff really starts to work because it's been on the bench for a while as a group, even though some of them are working, some not.
Yeah, and I think the name is escaping me, but Brad Jacobs' new, building supply like roll up that he's got, like whenever this thing gets going, that guy's gonna be in position to make an insane amount of money with all.
Is that Builder's First Source?
I think he rolled that into them. It starts with a Q because everything he does starts with a Q. The name's escaping me. But yeah, like about every 6 months he bought something else. It's some roofing company or a window company, or like it's always something. So he's just gonna stack them up while they're cheap, and then eventually there's going to be a year where they make so much money that it's going to be crazy. But to your point on Rocket Mortgage, like all these things, like, yeah, at some point you're going to get rates down enough to have a boom in housing again, a mini boom at least, you know. And to speak on that, like literally the weekend the war began, the current war in Iran, we had hit like a new low for the last couple of years or whatever for the 10-year. And we were actually looking at homes, and it was like a bonanza, and it's been dead, absolutely dead. And there was like, you had to like wait in line to do an open house. You know, it's probably the way it is all the time in Australia from everything I hear, but like
not recently,
not anymore. Yeah. And so it was crazy to see the war start. And I remember like seeing the news and just like, man, right when housing was finally about to come back, you could just feel it in the air with the realtors were getting excited, and it was just like gone.
It's amazing how quickly that vibe shifted.
Yeah.
I guess wars will do that for you.
They do.
Listen, Chase, we've been very US centric so far. And for those that don't know, Chase has about 5 jobs and publishes about 9 different products. But one of the ones I like, your new one, is Passport. And we just lost Ben. Let's carry on. I want to talk to you about the rest of the world for a second. Japan is something you've been writing about a lot recently. I mean, you know, I've been on the Japanese equity bull train for a while now. You know, clearly it's been working, but for reasons other than what I was expecting, right? Where's your thesis and how to play it?
Yep. So, I mean, I think all I've ever done is be wrong on Japan, the yen, you name it, right? If it's anywhere near there, I've probably been wrong. So all I know about Japan is that when they have the real move, I refuse to miss it. And for me, that's more of a capital flow story than anything. They have such a shocking amount of money abroad that if a decent amount of it ever comes back, like I want to be in on that wave. But you know, so far it hasn't been that great of a trade. Like if you look at Japan, they've done well the last few years, but then if you stack them up against everybody else, middle of the pack. Also, if you listen to Grant Williams' recent pod with Doug McDermott, I can't remember his name. That will make you want to buy it with both hands and both feet. But and to his point, like Japan's done such an excellent job of like capturing the middle. So forget the finished product that has, you know, your name bolted to it. Like talking about like kind of component level stuff in the middle that no one cares about, but is incredibly important. And he told a story that captured it well with Palmer Luckey's outfit, you know, building some drones, and they had a bunch of Chinese components in them because that's what drones do. But they went through the work to get rid of the Chinese components. But what they ended up with was a drone full of Japanese components, because if you want all these little components, the electrical and stuff, like you're probably going to go to one of those 2 places, maybe Korea. Like, so that like middle market electronics angle, which is just going to get more important. Obviously, if you watch the Robot Olympics, like you can kind of see where the future's going. Everybody's busy dunking on China for like all those things breaking themselves, and all I can think about is how much better they're going to be 3 years from now, right? So I love that angle from Japan. I like the mix of what Japanese has to offer. You know, it's not a bunch of
these
other than what like Bain's doing. It's not a bunch of financialized crap. It's real stuff. Like,
yeah, and
they kept their manufacturing by not chasing high PE the way we did for the last 20 years, 30 years.
It's these hyper specialized industrials, right? Which they've just got this knack, and you know, all of a sudden, you know, they become bottleneck stocks for 5 minutes, and you miss them. But there's enough around. A friend of mine, Mateen Chowdhury, who writes this Substack called Kabu Japan, spends his entire time digging up these middle market industrial firms that have sort of niche positions in certain manufacturing markets, and you know, a lot of them are dirt cheap. So I agree. I think you know, Japan is one you got to stock pick, because at some stage, if the yen makes the exporters, the core exporters, less competitive. At some stage, I mean, the value trade in the banks has really played out now. I mean, the banks are still working on the chart, but this is now a growth story. They're expensive now, or getting expensive.
Yeah, and to your point, like, you know, that letter is a country ETF letter, and there are countries where whatever country ETF works fine, and there are countries where you're just like, oh, this is not capturing what I wanted to capture, and I think Japan's a good case of that, where you look at the makeup and you're like, that is not how I would make this. You know what I mean? Like, but is what it is. And my problem has always been going with EWJ over DXJ, because you know, always expecting the yen to like maybe find a bottom, but not,
you and the squirrel alike.
hey, not for the last like 18 months though. I stopped paying attention.
I'm another yen bull tragic. Yeah. And you know, I've been fighting that chart for as long as I remember. But you know,
I'm actually long Kiwi yen these days. So,
oh, walk me through that. Walk me through that, because I know that you wrote a piece about New Zealand the other day. It was based around that. What's it?
Yeah, like they went from being a dumpster fire, honestly, for like kind of G20 whatever, compared to almost everybody for years, to all of a sudden being pretty warm. Now their inflation's warm too. It's kind of problematic, but a lot of it was just the chart. If you look at the chart of, you know, equities, the chart of the currency, it was really ugly and for a long time. And then especially if you do their country ETF versus the S&P, or excuse me, versus VEU, the all world XUS, that thing just finally had enough going down and started to break out. So that's what like got me. This is like a chart telling me to do the research. I looked at the research and was like, oh, good enough. So far, naturally, it kind of stopped going up as soon as it broke out. So we'll see how it goes. But
it's what's interesting. It's such an ag heavy economy,
which I don't mind.
Turn bullish, yeah. For it to turn bullish in a super El Nino year, right?
Right.
You know, it has me scratching my head. But you know, you're right. Interrogate the chart, because someone's figured it out.
Yeah, when it comes to those country ETFs, I love to look at their chart versus all world XUS or versus S&P. That I like to especially I like to capture the ones that haven't been doing great. That sometimes for reasons you can't even figure out, just start to pick it up and do a little better.
I know this contradicts directly what we just said about Japan, but I mean, owning the EWJ versus stock picking, but you know, that chart speaks volumes to me. Yeah, right.
Yeah,
feels like very early.
It does. It's finally kind of at least basing, you know, and it's a 4-year base, really. I mean, so it's one of those things that if it gets going, then you just can't not own Japan if it gets going. That's the way I view Japan. And there's a few places that I would probably put in that category. There are bull markets in countries I'm willing to miss, not Japan. So if it ever gets going, I will ride that. That's for sure.
Which of your country ETFs are flashing at you right now? Right.
The problem is a lot of them are doing good, but like they've been
amazing.
So like,
yeah.
So like stuff like Greece, which has been a favorite of mine for years, like now it's like, man, this has worked so good that like I'm not sure how much longer I really want to stay, but that's one that comes to mind. Austria is one that I think a lot of people sleep on, that has had quietly a magnificent run. I'm trying to think some others that are really interesting. I think we share, you know, the interest in Africa with precious metals getting off the mat, thanks to Scotty. I think that, you know, helps South Africa, which helps obviously the rest of, you know, that ETF, at least for
I mean, I wrote a piece at the beginning of the year calling AFK, which is the Africa ETF, basically GDX in a safari suit.
Yes, that's true.
Let me ask you a question about this with EM, because we talked about when I was down in Colombia, and I was really bullish. I was like, came away from that. I was in Medellin. I was like, wow. And you know, when we talk about emerging market, the FX is such an issue, liquidity is such an issue, right? Like, so it's like, how do you think about those as you approach all these different markets? And I would agree that it's like so many, everybody's in the dollar assets. So that anytime there's stuff that's like not paid attention to, whether it's consumer in the dollar assets or it's anything, like it's time to look at it. But how do you personally go about that, of what your thinking process? And do you hedge?
Yeah.
Do you have an FX opinion first? Like how just walk us through kind of your process.
Yeah, awesome question. I don't always start with that, but sometimes it's really important. So a perfect example is Brazil. Every macro bro I know loves Brazil. Like there's 45 country ETFs, and it seems like macro guys only know one, maybe two. They know Brazil. They probably know Japan, which is probably why I should stop paying attention to it. But Brazil is a perfect case where, like, if you look at the government's budget deficit, it's awful. Like they make the American deficit blush often. So like, yes, they have high rates, and a lot of people get excited about that because they get to cut rates. It's like, yeah, but if you're running like 10% budget deficits, you don't really get to cut rates and have it last. So I have largely stayed away from Brazil because I don't trust the currency, because I don't trust the fiscal policy. So I do think that's a good example of where like it can inform you to stay away from some traps. Obviously, big political shifts, especially if they're not well foreseen, like can be good. I do think there's a lot of traps though, like to the point of Colombia. I think Colombia is a bit of a trap, but that's just because I think that the fellow that won is fool's gold and fake. But so I mean, so far like policy's been decent, and I think it's important to watch when it comes to EMs. When you get an election, it matters how much you won by and what you have in the legislature. So a lot of times you'll get like, oh, the right wing guy won. We're in business, and it's like, the right wing guy won by 0.03%, and they don't have the legislature. Who cares? Like this person's going to be looking for a job in 9 months. You know what I mean? That's an area where it worries me in Colombia and in Peru.
And then in jail 3 years later, because that is the way with Latin American presidents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think more than half of like prior LATAM leaders are like in hot water for some reason. But yeah, it just depends. So like a lot of the I used to be able to say if it's like a G10, you can ignore the currency. Maybe you can't say that anymore, I guess. But it plays a role, and you could see it if you watch the country ETFs. I don't know what percentage of the moves is FX, but man, it's pretty significant. You can't get cool country idea and FX wrong and still win. You really can't. I guess other than maybe Argentina.
One exception, Turkey.
Yeah, that's fair. Oh, well, so that adds another layer. That's a great point. So if you have a country that has insane inflation, that is awesome because everyone has to hide in stocks. It's the opposite of Brazil, where everyone has to hide in fixed income. Like, and to the point where when Turkey started to get their act together with more normal monetary policy, I'm like, hey, well, guys, shouldn't we keep the 80% inflation going? Like that's what was keeping these stocks up. But granted, like I actually love Turkey's like actual corporate world. Like they have amazing companies doing amazing stuff, very competitive, good prices, amazing workforce. Like there's a lot of reasons to like Turkey other than their hyperinflation, though that was very helpful for the equities.
And maybe you can think about what we don't see now, like what would actually get that guy out of office? Like how that could be, I mean, not the
death.
He does seem kind of like the guy who runs Belarus, who's been on the only president since 1992.
That's crazy. Yeah. Yeah, I do worry about that though. To be clear, even with China, like it's so hard to imagine like the post-G world. Same with Turkey. Like in a lot of ways, it'll be better, obviously, because the guy is not exactly very democratic. So, but at the same time, they've had a tremendous amount of success, both geopolitically and economically, at least on a nominal basis, especially but even on a real basis. I mean, they've done well in a lot of ways. So that is a scary thing. Like if the guy gets hit by a bus, it's hard. It's just unnerving to think about the volatility that would come after it. The flip side is going to be the places where can we just please get rid of this guy? Like Indonesia, which is a place that we both have loved, at least in the past, that cannot get out of its own way. Yeah. That guy's not very good at his job, at least from a capital markets perspective.
I mean, a combination of the war and this extraordinary kerfuffle with MSCI was really what undid Indonesia, that trade. But I'm seeing I'm seeing some higher highs and lower lows in EIDO. I'm still tiny long in the beta portfolio there, but that was a lousy call, yeah, almost a year ago.
I was long and then the MSCI thing hit, and then it kind of recovered, and I was like, all right, I think we'll be okay. And then it started going back down. I was like, all right, I got to get out of here. But that country, whenever someone gets around to doing a decent job, it's like Nigeria for me. Like that is I'm glad, honestly, they got rid of the ETF because I'm a sucker for Nigeria. Although if
not
they had
that
the
many
ETF,
people ever.
I know. I wrote about that like in a blog in like 2015. Like I'm ridiculous with Nigeria, but they're having an insanely good year, and like no one knows about it, but because they don't have an ETF anymore for one reason. But I like places where like you just have to have just decent policy, and a lot of the just internal stuff can just take over. Like human capital is not bad there.
There's a common thread there, right? Which is that they've all got the so-called demographic dividend, right? Nigeria, Indonesia, and India. And the big debate is demographic dividends are fantastic if you capitalize on them. Yeah. If you don't, and you've got out of control youth unemployment, you've got an even bigger problem.
Yeah, it's like riding a tiger. Just don't get off. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes though, my takeaway with like Medellin was like buy the local real estate. I'm not necessarily trying to mess with the equity market, even though the Colombian peso has been one of the strongest currencies in the world for the last 5 years, even better dollar. But like, sometimes it's like if you had a demographic thing, they need houses, and if things are getting better, that is an easier way than messing around with the stock market. And some guys like, oh, I'm going to do it on equities. You know what I mean? Like there's always so many games that can be played, whereas real estate's kind of real estate.
Well, games can happen there too, especially on like a one-off basis. But it's funny. I was looking at flats in Medellin probably a decade ago. It was so obvious that it, like everyone still thought of all the drug problems and stuff, and it was like no, like that stuff is largely gone. Yeah, it's like, and for me, I hate heat. Like I really hate heat.
That's
so
not
Medellin
either, yeah.
I know. So like it always interested me from that perspective, the eternal spring. So
yeah, I mean, my buddy George Gammon went down there about a decade ago, and he's done really well. And yeah, that's what I visited, and it was just the weather never changes. A lot of people have a view because it's in a valley. They have an international airport now. They're having direct flights. I don't know. I'm bullish that place. Let's put it that way.
Hey, speaking of those flights, Copa Airlines, that's been a good one for some really LATAM airlines. Yeah.
Let me ask you this.
You and Zach have been talking about LATAM airlines. I miss that, man. I mean, I have a very strict no airline rule typically.
That's a great rule, to be fair.
Buffett has that rule. So,
what got you into that trade?
Not me. So we have essentially like a mining analyst, which is Zach's uncle, who's very, very familiar with LATAM. He ran a gold company down in Panama and stuff. So like he just knew it. Same with like Bladex, the bank down there, and Cybest both. We've had good runs and all that stuff. Yeah, and that is nothing to do with me, so I can take no credit. Other than just like putting my eyes on it after the idea and being like, yeah, I like it. They were all insanely cheap when we bought them. So
give me an example.
It was a deep value call, right?
Yeah, just no one cares because they're in Latin America call, I think, largely. And they're ADRs too. Like there's not, or direct listings maybe even for a couple of them. So it's not even like you have to go down to their exchanges for them.
Do you have any examples of you got in it and then some government or something happened and then you got dropped, and then what do you do? Because I remember Mexican airports a couple years back had a government-oriented thing. They got dropped hard in one day, and then I had some buddies who were along them. And what's like the kind of thinking process on that? Once you just got dropped 25%, 30% for something geopolitical, do you stay in, or do you think, oh, maybe now more supply will come out and like supply will be met with every rally will be met, right? So now you kind of have a negative convexity to it.
It would depend on what it was. So like I've been there with the country ETFs with both Indonesia and Turkey. And it just depends, like for me, does this actually change things for like where this is going to be in 3 years or whatever, or not? So like you think about Turkey, when they put like one of the opposition people in jail or whatever, and the market dropped like 12% in a day or something. I look at that and I'm like, whatever, I don't care. Like, I should care. I get it. I don't. And it came right back. It did, like, but then Indonesia on like the MSCI thing, that was one where, you know, at first I was like, there's no way they'll let this happen. But the more I watched Bowo, like, he stays populist to a fault. Like, you got to be populist. I feel you, buddy, but like, don't hurt yourself with it for fun. You know what I mean? And I started feeling like he was too populist for his own good. And that is why I just got out of that one. So I think it would have to be very case by case on exactly what was going on with it. Because a lot of people will just panic on stuff that doesn't actually change the reality on the ground for past a month or something. If I feel confident that like whatever, sure, this is like an annoyance for a month, I'll just probably add or just hold or whatever. But if it's like, oh wow, this changes everything, then it would be for me like, no, get me out of here.
So in terms of generally, I mean, because you have a really interesting seat in that you talk to lots of smart people through your research business, and you help run an RIA, and you help run an RIA which is pretty unusual in that you're very outward looking and not afraid to own foreign stocks in there. I mean, so maybe asking you this question is dumb, but what does it take to become, for the median US investor to take the opportunity in foreign stocks seriously?
Probably a decade of outperformances. That's my fear, you know, like it's such a good question. I struggle with it. I think it's not even outperformance. It's more that the US market has to slow down. If the US market goes up 10% a year and foreign stocks go up 20, no one in America is going to notice. I'm convinced of that. They'll just count their nominal 10 and be like, oh man, look how good I'm doing. But I think if the US market was flat for 5 years and then EM was on like a 120% tear over that 5 years or something, that's when people would notice, and you would see people getting in, you know, dusting off their password and changing their 401k allocation or whatever. But it's a trap though, because nominally, yeah, you're probably going to be up 10% a year because of, you know, the deficits and the inflation and everything.
You would think, though, also there's kind of a compounding effect that if it really happens, like let's just, and not saying exact, but like the .com, right? We have a kind of a credit issue. .com falls apart. They decide, hey, we want to keep the credit thing going. They tank the dollar to keep it going, right? And we know how it ended. But let's be honest, the real cycle ended in 2000. 07 was just a result of tanking the dollar and letting credit just go wild. You'd get paid twice, right? You'd be your Nigerian and all this stuff, you know, dollar goes down and then money flows out. And one of the things we talked to Louis Gabb about, and we talked a lot, Rupert and I have, is when you have these like little areas, whether it's a uranium miner or it's whatever, it doesn't take that much money. You know, like think about today, NVIDIA was 500 billion today, one day. Like think about that, what do to all these areas we're talking about. Just like that alone could just drive insane, like because the elasticity is so high, right?
Yeah, and it's an underrated point. I don't think people think about this enough. And when you think about, you know, the capital flows have been, you know, one direction only from the rest of the world into the US. As they flow back out, it is like trying to put, you know, a elephant through a garden hose. Like it's just, and you can see it with some of the gap ups on bad dollar days where some of these things are pretty gnarly. And I can tell you from the ETF standpoint, you know, 2 years ago, I think I started buying Greece. And that's not a super liquid ETF, you know, but we're not a $50 billion fund or something like, and I could not put on more than like 0.1, 0.2 of that a day. And that was even still moving it a good bit. So if, you know, if some big shop wanted to be like, hey, like, let's move, you know, 5% over to, yeah, good luck with that. So that lives rent free in my head at all times, that if we reverse the pumps, some of this stuff is going to go in ways that is going to shock people, I think. And it can be like nondescript stuff. It doesn't have to be, you know, South Korea memory stuff. It's going to be almost anything and everything, I think. Some of this Chinese stuff where you're just like, how is it this cheap? Like, well, there's going to be a day where it isn't going to be. And it's going to be because, we reverse the pumps and people realize they have some good businesses.
Yeah, well, from your mouth to God's ear, it's certainly going to help my bag. So I want to flip just at the end to talk about energy. And you had a great call, which was, I know you don't do pair trades traditionally, but you had a great call at the beginning of the year for long coal and short US natural gas. And it was something that you'd be interested in as long as the straits remain shut. I don't think you're expecting that to carry on for quite as long. But why don't you walk through the thesis here? And I know that there are lots of very vocal natural gas bulls around. All right. And by the way, this is the UNL. So this is the 12-month natural gas strip, because we all know that front month.
It's a good way to view it. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a tough way to look at it.
Yeah. So this one, I'm usually pretty bullish natural gas, like Henry Hub natural gas, US gas. But coming into this year, it really started to flip for me. Mostly because I thought the war would lead to, some production increase in the Permian, which would come with the associated gas, and there's nowhere to put it. We've had that to a degree, though, like the associated production is not up that much. But I think a lot of people that were, nat gas bulls in the US think it's more fungible than it is. Like, the amount of LNG exports you can do is incredibly fixed. All it can actually do is go down, other than obviously when you have new capacity come online. But other than that, you can just have outages where it goes down. So given that constraint, the US can only do so much to capture these like big LNG moves like we have right now. So to see what's going on with Qatar, production and exports being offline, LNG prices have to go up as long as people want to have gas, and they do. So we've had that. We've had LNG, whether it's the TTF or JKM, pretty much making new highs very regularly of late for obvious reasons relating to the war. But the US can't really chase that because we can't do anything significant to up that export profile. So if we have higher production, which we always do, our gas guys love to make gas no matter the price, sadly. Nothing we can do to keep up with that. But if you want to fight that LNG price, if you're in Asia or you're in Europe, well, you got to turn to coal. So I just figured there would be a lot of gas to coal switching in Asia and Europe, and we could not capitalize on that price here in the US. So far, at least that has been how it's worked out. Plus, El Nino could create a very, very chill, winter for North America and Europe. And if that plays out, the gas price has that much more pressure on it.
Let me ask you. It's just going to say, do you think about, when we think about like lower probability, higher impact events, is energy kind of top? And I guess this El Nino, even though people know about it, doesn't seem to be fully. It's one of those things that like it's hard to price in. You know what I mean? Like, or is there anything else you're looking at that could be really shake the status quo as it is?
I mean, I have been and stayed bullish oil since the war began. A lot of people just got tired of it, and I totally understand why. I'm still very bullish oil. Like, to me, math still matters. And if you hold the price down in a fake way, like we have with all the jawboning, you just make the problem worse eventually. It doesn't have to be immediate. Now, if the war ends and the strait truly opens, then forget about it. All bets are off. I think everything will be fine. But we don't live in that world yet. We still have to empty SPRs just to try to stay close to even. And we're not even. Like, we're still losing supply even with these SPR releases. That in the US we don't have that much left. Like, we got one more like release essentially of an announcement, and it's over. Which is not a comfortable place to be in given this backdrop. For the world, forget the US, like we just basically export it all. And China's coming back on the buying side finally, and it's getting more meaningful by the month. July was higher than June. It looks like August will be higher than July. I think China was the single biggest factor in the price staying relatively benign. So if the single biggest factor is getting worse, you know, the amount getting out of the Gulf is low and staying pretty low. More is getting out of the Strait of Hormuz lately, but then less is getting out of the Red Sea. So that's kind of been close enough to a wash. So I'm still bullish oil as long as this war is taking place. Now, that's what's going to get the war to end eventually when oil finally catches up and gets expensive. I think that's when the U.S. panics and takes whatever deal they can get. But so I'm still bullish there.
It also permissions you to own risk assets elsewhere, right?
100%. So the portfolio angle of this is so underrated, and I've had to argue this, like, even in our own internal team, like, oh, we have too much oil. Like, whoa. Like, you may as well think of like a big chunk of this as like a giant cheap hedge. Like, it's both a speculation and a hedge. It's hard to find things that are both, where, like, to me, the math on both works. And to your point, yeah, if you want to own a bunch of risk, like, you can't have oil going up because it'll blow up your risk. Like, oil is the margin thief of all margin thieves. So it gives you that license, that permission. And even if it's just some crazy calls or whatever, like, that gives you permission to have a more risk. So, like, for people that are like underweight energy down, yeah, that's just crazy. Like, you should be structurally overweight at least for a while, like, to me.
And you don't have to own that much to be structurally underweight. It's only 3.5% of the S&P.
Exactly. I would be cool with 3% of NAV and crazy calls. That's my view. I mean, I like March 27 150s. Like, I
haven't looked at oil vol. Where's the vol at right now? You know,
I haven't looked lately myself, but it had come in a good bit. Like, because I was watching and I think it still has, actually, because I was watching my calls. Every once in a while, there's a news item where it will get gnarly again, and I'll give a little bit back.
So OVX is at 46 now versus a sort of beginning of the war high triple digits. I mean, so it's halved.
Not bad at all. That's a good time to go get some crazy calls, in my opinion.
Get some more crazy calls,
yeah. And I don't even think the 150 is going to materialize, but I think those 150s, the bid they catch if Saudi Arabia or UAE, infrastructure catches a few missiles, is going to be crazy. Like, because at that point, to your point of like the risk that you get to take, I just think there'll be a stampede into the intense oil calls if the missiles start hitting important stuff, and I'm not convinced they won't.
Well, go on, give us something a little bit more optimistic to finish off. We're not finishing on missiles, even though that you have a backstory in missiles. Benny, I don't know if you knew that Chase was a rocket scientist before.
No, I didn't. Wow.
All right. So time out. People do this. They say I was a rocket scientist. So I was not. So I did work at a rocket research lab for the Air Force. But I was a programmer.
Good enough for me. It's good enough for me.
Yeah. It turns out those people really are that smart. Usually that weird too. But that was a great experience.
Right?
Yeah. It was a great experience, and to be clear, it's for one of my earlier answers I gave on R&D, it really opened my eyes to the power of research and development, and not on the super applied side of like, this is 8 inches away from being a product, but in the like, let's do science experiments and mess with stuff and play with toys. That has more downstream impact than people realize. If you go back and look at the stuff that has come out of like Bell Labs, or the stuff that came out of the Xerox Park, the stuff that has come out of government research labs, it's like all of modern life basically started at some nerdy research lab. You go back to, information theory with Claude Shannon, Bell Labs type stuff. Like, and to the point he made was like, no one at Bell Labs ever told me what to do. Like, they was just like, I don't know.
That's what I heard too.
Go play with toys, buddy.
Yeah, I talked about John Kelly in my essay, my last essay, and it's like, he was another guy in there. There was a lot of smart cookies in there that they just let just go,
right.
Come up with some stuff. Be smart, be around other smart guys, and see what you can come up with. And they did. There was a lot of stuff.
Is John Kelly the Skunkworks guy, or am I thinking of a different Kelly?
The guy, the Kelly Criterion, like who created sizing,
like
the ceiling of.
Yeah, I got you.
Yeah, because I think signal theory.
I think him,
hanging around
Claude, and Ed Thorpe were all friends about that same time, which is, and then it's like a Mount Rushmore of brains right there.
Yeah.
Well, hanging around with smart people is why we do this podcast and why we got you on, Chase. Tell everybody where they can find you on the internet.
Yeah, pineconemacro.com. That's the easiest way, and on Twitter at Pinecone Macro.
Perfect. Well, I highly recommend people do that immediately if they aren't already. Chase, this has been so much fun. Thanks for coming on. So at 7 p.m. Eastern on Thursday the 27th, good luck with Jackson Hole if you've got positions on tomorrow. And it's Benny the Squirrel and Pinecone Macro's Chase Taylor out.
We're out.